Spine-chilling mystery, soldiers exposed to the same sinister force that haunted gold miners. The sun sank low in Timber Falls, like a dying ember clinging to the last light of day. As shadows clawed at the cracks in the broken sidewalks, Sarah felt a pulse of unease in her chest. She walked briskly, her heart racing, haunted by the feeling that something was watching her. Whispers of the past crept into her mind, stories of soldiers tormented by unshakable fears. She had left that life, yet it clung to her now, wrapped like a vine around her throat, squeezing tighter with each step. Few people filled the streets anymore, their laughter replaced with a suffocating silence. A car passed slowly, its headlights pooling on the pavement. Sarah's grip tightened on her son's small hand. Each tick of the second hand on her watch felt like the countdown to some unseen disaster. "Mommy," Jake whispered, his eyes wide, searching. He too sensed it, the tension that hung thick like fog. That night, as shadows danced in the corners of her room, Sarah lay awake next to Jake. He would drift off to dreamland as she wrestled her own haunting visions. Figures loomed in the periphery of her vision, whispers echoed just beyond her understanding. The miners, they should have left the treasure alone. It was a tale told by campfire light, about the spirits guarding accursed gold. Whatever battle she had fought overseas now felt trivial compared to the war waging inside her. Each sound, the creaking of the house, the wind howling, sent shivers coursing down her spine. The ghosts of the soldiers she served with invaded her thoughts, their faces etched with unable to forget fears, the same fears that now held her captive, remembering stories from those nights in the barracks, whispers of how they each saw shadows, shared visions of being watched. It wasn't just her, something was wrong with Timber Falls. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the town breathing with an unseen malevolence. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling. It felt like they were all connected somehow. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Desperate for answers, she organized a meeting with the veterans in town, sharing tales of their shared nightmares under the light of flickering bulbs. They pored over old maps in dimly lit cafes, but the more they uncovered, the more the townsfolk turned their backs, dismissing their fears as paranoia. The soldiers felt it too, the grip of distrust strangling their solidarity. One night, frozen at her window, grasping her phone for hope, she spotted her neighbor lurking, their eyes wild, probing the darkness. It felt as if the very air shifted, and the town held its breath. The tremors ran through her body. Whatever malevolence stalked them whispered again, louder now, pressing against her mind. "You should have left the treasure alone." The ominous sound slithered into her ears as dread filled the room. She needed to find Jake and confront this darkness. But was the true horror lurking within Timber Falls, just beyond the thin veil of night? Sarah's heart raced as she tiptoed through the darkened house, fear coiling tight in her chest. Jake had fallen asleep, but now she felt the weight of the night piercing through the thin walls. Shadows crept and swirled, and every creak of the house felt like a voice calling her name. She couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had seeped into their lives, something that began with those old stories of the miners and the cursed gold. She recalled them again, thick fog rolling over the mountains, visions of figures with hollow eyes wandering beneath the earth, guarding their treasure. Jake stirred in his sleep, mumbling incoherently. Panic surged through Sarah as she pictured a figure standing over him, their twisted smile, eyes glowing with malevolence. She had to fight it, had to protect her son. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for her phone. The dim light offered little comfort, but she needed to do something, reach out to someone. The veterans had shared stories of how this curse had changed them. Could it be that simple? Could they confront whatever evil was left in the town? As she dialed Caleb's number, an icy breeze rasped through the window, rattling the pane. A burst of static echoed through her phone, the line dead. Come on, she muttered, turning away from the window. The chill seeped deeper into her bones, wrapping around her throat like a ghostly hand, and then she heard it, a soft whispering, delicate but urgent. You should be left it alone. It echoed in her mind, muddled and overlapping, a chorus of voices that chilled her to the core. Her breath quickened as fear coiled tighter, she could feel the dread settling under her skin. No, she hissed, almost shouting. Leave us alone. But the air grew thick with despair. Her eyes flitted to Jake, who was still lost in dreams. She needed to act. Dread hung over her like a noose, threatening to unravel everything. She bolted down the dark hallway, searching desperately for a sign that would bring her solace. Opening the front door, she stepped out into the night. The mist wrapped around her like a shroud, concealing the world. The streetlights flickered erratically. Caleb, she called, voice trembling, but the silence swallowed her words. She felt a sudden pull towards the old mine entrance, the very heart of the stories that had fueled her nightmares. Something was waiting for her there. With every step, the air grew heavier. Each footfall echoed in her ears, reminders of the past, of the miners who had never returned, of the soldiers carrying unseen scars. Hope twisted into hopelessness as she approached the gaping maw of darkness. Sensing movement, she froze. In the shadows, a figure emerged, shrouded in darkness, and Sarah's breath caught. The light caught its eyes, pale, reflecting like a predator in the night. It stepped forward, and she recognized it immediately. The unmistakable face of a soldier she had once known, a ghost of the past, lost and hunger in its gaze. Sarah, it whispered, voice raspy and hollow, you need to understand. Just then, a scream sliced through the night. It was Jake. Her heart lurched. Jake! She screamed, tearing herself from the clutches of the specter. She rushed back towards the house, but her mind buzzed with fear and confusion. What had she awakened? With each frantic step, she realized she was running against something she didn't fully understand, something that wouldn't let them go easily. Darkness encircled her as she neared their home. The door creaked open, but would it be salvation or doom waiting inside? As Sarah stepped cautiously through the front door, the dim interior of the house seemed even more foreboding than before. The air felt stale, as if it had held its breath in anticipation of her return. The walls, laden with shadows, loomed over her like an invisible crowd. Jake! She called again, her voice trembling as it ricocheted off the walls. The silence was suffocating, each heartbeat amplifying her growing dread. She could feel the chill from the mine still gripping her, its ghostly fingers tracing her spine. Quickly, she moved toward his room, her feet pressing down on the wooden floorboards that creaked in protest. As she entered, the sight of her son asleep seemed oddly serene, but an unsettling knot twisted in her stomach. She rushed to his side, her fingers brushing his forehead. His skin was cold, too cold. Jake, wake up! She shook him gently, but he remained unresponsive, deep in a nightmare of his own. Panic surged, and she glanced around, half expecting the sinister soldier's apparition to emerge from the shadows again. Jake! She insisted more forcefully, her heart pounding like a drum. She fought back the rising hysteria, trying to remember her mother's words about checking for signs when kids sleep too deeply. But deep down, she knew this was different. The sinister aura clung to the very air, pulsating with an uncanny energy. Suddenly, a distant thud echoed from the living room, jolting her from her thoughts. She turned sharply, instinctively shielding Jake as if he could somehow sense the danger lurking just outside of their safety. Who is there? She called, voice steadier than she felt, but dread crept back, cold and serpentine. She crept toward the sound, each cautious step setting her nerves ablaze. The living room lay shrouded in darkness, save for glimmers of light that flickered from the streetlights outside, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. As she stepped in, the breath caught in her throat. On the coffee table, lay an old book, a journal, its pages yellowed and frayed at the edges. It hadn't been there before. Heart racing, she skimmed the cover. The title, barely legible, read Whispers of the Cursed. Instinctively, she reached for it, her fingers brushing the cool surface. At that moment, another thud rang out from the direction of the kitchen, followed by a soft, whispered voice. You should be left it alone. A cold sweat broke out across her brow. Panic clawed at her unless she focused on the journal. She had to know more. With shaking hands, she opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, some fading and barely readable, but familiar phrases caught her eye like a hungry beast. The gold must remain unfound, guardians of the mine, and do not awaken them. Chills rippled through her as she flipped through the pages. Each word felt like a warning, a tether to the faded stories from her childhood. They were the same tales that had haunted her dreams, blocking out sleep and peace. Stop, please, she whispered, feeling the walls close in on her. Her mind raced as the dim light began to flicker. From behind her, the shadows shifted again, and Sarah turned instinctively, searching for the source. The kitchen stood dark, menacing, yet an unsettling feeling directed her gaze back to the book. The last entry sent a jolt of terror through her. If you seek the truth, expect the worst. The past must stay buried. A sudden blast of cold air enveloped her, and for the briefest moment, she could see the vague outline of a figure lurking behind her. Panic exploded within her, blinding her with dread. Jake! She screamed, turning back toward his room, but the uncertainty clawed at her heart. Had she disturbed something far worse than she could ever have imagined? Again, the chilling whispers echoed in the calm, and then, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed her whole. Sarah stood paralyzed, her breath shallow and frantic. The air felt thick, charged with malice, and she instinctively clutched the journal like a lifeline. Where was Jake? Jake! She yelled again, the sound of her own voice rising in panic. The emptiness returned her call with mocking echoes. She stumbled toward his room, the familiar layout of the house warped in her mind as shadows twisted around her. A soft rustling came from the corner of the living room, drawing her attention. Heart racing, she moved cautiously toward the sound. A flicker of light from outside revealed a shadow darting across the floor, a fleeting glimpse, but it was enough to send her heart hammering wildly. The whispers returned, slithering through the silent air. You shouldn't have come back. It knows who's there. Sarah demanded, her voice shaking but edged with a desperate firmness. She felt the weight of unseen eyes on her, scrutinizing, hungry. A ghostly chill bit at her skin, wrapping around her like an icy shroud. She moved further into the room, the journal clutched tightly. The creaking floorboards betrayed her steps, a warning, a cry for help, an invitation to whatever horror awaited her. The flickering light cast monstrous shapes on the walls, and Sarah's pulse quickened as her own shadow wavered, distorted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. She forced herself to focus, to stay grounded. Jake! She shouted one last time, her heart racing as dread and desperation collided. Silence enveloped her again, a suffocating, oppressive silence. It felt alive, wrapping around her throat as if silencing her cries. And then, she heard it, a faint whimper, coming from beyond the closed door of his bedroom. Without a second thought, Sarah rushed forward, throwing the door wide open. The room, dim but familiar, welcomed her with its stillness, but Jake was nowhere to be seen. Panic surged within her. Where could he have gone? Suddenly, she spotted a movement at the closet door. A whisper, frantic and pained, "Mommy, help Jake." She dashed to the closet, flinging it open. Empty, save for a shadow that seemed to crawl on its own. Her heart raced. "Stay there, I'm coming," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. She could feel the cold creeping up her spine, moisture forming in her palms. But as she turned, she froze. Standing in the hallway, illuminated only by the remaining flicker of light, was an apparition, a soldier, eyes wide with terror, mouth agape as if trapped in a scream. His body flickered, dimmed, and then vanished into the darkness, leaving only the hint of decay in the air. Sarah's breath stopped, the journal heavy in her hands. She stepped back, the cold of the floor biting into her feet. "What do you want?" she demanded, though she knew the answer already, echoing through her mind. You awakened what was buried, the soldier's voice whispered, reverberating around her. Then came a loud bang from the other side of the house, a sound that erupted like thunder, shaking the very foundations. Sarah's heart raced uncontrollably. Jake! She screamed once more, driving her to the unknown, dread pupil deep within her vision. She sprinted toward the living room. A flashing terror ignited in her mind. If Jake was with the soldier, what had he awakened? The air thickened with anguish, a palpable sense of foreboding. Each step drew her nearer to whatever evil had been lurking in the shadows. The need to protect Jake surging within her made her run faster, pushing through fear, yet with every step, the lingering question burned brighter in her mind. What was she truly up against? What had she unleashed by entering this cursed home? And as she swung open the door to the living room, the dread of all her discoveries collided with a reality she could hardly comprehend. What awaited her could change everything. The air hummed with tension as Sarah stepped into the living room. Shadows flickered, drifting like phantoms along the walls. She could feel the darkness pressing in, thick and suffocating. Panic erupted inside her, clawing at her sanity as the screams of the soldier echoed in her mind. Jake! She shouted, her voice fraying around the edges. He had to be there. He had to be safe. Only silence answered, heavy and oppressive. Sarah's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The journal felt cold, almost lifeless, as she clutched it tighter, hoping it would guide her through the uncertainty that wrapped around her like a shroud. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps behind her, an unsettling reminder that she was not alone in this house. The oppressive presence loomed, heavier than the shadows. The chaos whispered in chilling tones, "You awakened what was buried." She could barely breathe. With shaky breaths, she turned her gaze toward the windows. Dark figures shifted outside, indistinct in the moonlight but undeniably there. They surrounded the house, their presence like a malevolent fog creeping ever closer. Panic surged as she realized they weren't just shadows, they were memories, twisted remnants of stories untold. Suddenly, another loud bang erupted from the kitchen, a thunderous crash that sent echoes spiraling through the walls. Sarah jumped, instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, but Jake was out there. He needed her. Jake! She screamed again, her voice trembling. The cold realization that time was running out crashed over her, gripping her heart. She dashed to the kitchen door, flinging it open. The room lay in disarray, a broken chair, shattered dishes scattered across the floor. But what caught her eye was a red, wet line crawling from the back door, dark and oozing like a serpent across the tiles. With each measured step into the kitchen, the walls seemed to close in around her. The air vibrated with an electric charge, as if the very house was alive. A low growl emanated from the shadows beyond the door, a warning that chilled her blood. She hesitated. "Stay strong," she murmured to herself, but doubt gnawed at her. Just as she gathered her resolve, a figure stepped into the sliver of light behind her, a small boy, disheveled and trembling. "Mommy, it's coming." Jake's eyes were wide, filled with a fear that sent icy fingers down her spine. "Jake!" she shouted, dropping to her knees as he ran into her arms. She could feel his tiny body tremble, the warmth of him grounding her momentarily. But then came an echoing laughter, cruel and taunting, scattering her brief sense of security. "I can't let it take you, Jake," she whispered fiercely, glancing back toward the kitchen. A wisp of dark mist slithered through the crack in the floor as the laughter grew louder, wrapping around them like a dark blanket. "Mommy!" Jake whimpered, pulling away. "It wants us stop!" she yelled, her heart racing. It was terrifying, hearing that voice, recognizing the truth buried beneath layers of monstrous emotions. The very shadows that haunted the house had a hunger, a need that threatened to consume them both. "Mommy, please!" Jake cried, his small voice cutting through the dark. Before she could respond, a shard of glass flew from the shattered kitchen, narrowly missing her. Sarah yanked Jake close, the adrenaline pounding through her veins. The reality was breaking down, shadows weaving their way into the corners of her mind, threatening to pull them into a darkness that promised nothing but despair. Run! She screamed, her voice raw. Together, they darted through the living room, the air thickening with every thundering pulse of fear. Shadows hungered, a drumbeat of chaos echoing behind them. As she rushed for the front door, something icy gripped her ankle. The shadow had reached out, an extension of the darkness that thrived in this cursed place. Sarah fell, pain tearing through her as she struggled against it. Help! She cried, flailing. The darkness pulled her closer, a deep voice whispering promises of what she'd awakened, but then she felt Jake's small hand in hers, pulling her back toward the door, pulling her from the clutches of reckoning. "Mommy, don't give up!" he shouted, his words filled her with a fire she thought was extinguished. But what had she truly awakened? In her heart, she sensed that the worst was yet to come. Together, they sprinted outside, but the night had other plans. A lingering darkness slipped free from the house, ready to follow them into the world beyond. "Where do we go?" she gasped, breathless and terrified. Shadows danced around them, slipping like tides against their feet. "Anywhere but here," Jake whispered, wide-eyed, and that was when she saw it, a figure emerging from the darkness, not a soldier but something far worse, a symbol of the embodiment of all that had been lost. "Come back," it beckoned, the air distorted with its call. What had they unleashed? What awaited them just beyond the threshold? The horror of the unknown twisted in her thoughts, 'cause now, they had become the hunted. The night threatened to swallow them whole as Sarah and Jake stood, frozen in place, heartbeats drumming against their ribs. The figure loomed larger than shadows should, its form shifting, molding into something both familiar and terrifying. Ghostly echoes of the past wrapped tightly around them, whispers threading through the air, fragments of memory woven into the fabric of the night. "Mommy, let's go." Jake tugged at her hand, his voice tinged with desperation. Yet, a compulsion to stand firm rooted Sarah to the spot. She felt the pull of the figure, a magnetic force urging her closer. It was as if the darkness recognized her pain, her fear. No, it was feeding off it. "Don't look at it, Jake," she instructed, desperately attempting to shield her son's gaze from the wraith. Her heart raced as the whisper took shape, transforming into guttural words that painted sinister promises. "You're so close to the truth," it taunted. "Come, remember." The air thickened, felt heavy with expectation. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand tighter, he was all that mattered now. They could not fall victim to this twisted grasping. The memories of the weighing darkness chased them, mocking their fear. A glint of red caught her eye below the line of blood snaking from the house beckoned like a wound still fresh, another growl emitted from the depths of the looming figure. The shadows thrummed, vibrated with a raw pulse, corrupting everything they touched. Time twisted. Seconds felt like hours, endless space contracting around them. "Mommy, I'm scared." Jake whimpered, his grip tightening as he pressed against her. The warmth of his small body felt so fragile against the chill that enveloped them. With a hard swallow, she turned to look at Jake, drawing strength from his small frame. "We'll make it through. I promise," she said with a confidence she didn't feel. But beneath the surface, her mind battled a sinister truth: whatever had awoken in the house craved them. It yearned for their fear, their pain, their memory. The figure took a step forward, its form flickering erratically in the dim light, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw the face of a soldier. The realization sliced through her, a connection to the stories that had been buried in the shadows all along. "What are you?" Sarah demanded, a fire igniting within her. Her voice wasn't just defiance, it was survival. "Your past," the voice whispered back, an echo of the horrors she had unwillingly unearthed. The same darkness that drove men mad, here to reclaim what was lost. In reflex, she pulled Jake tighter, shifting direction. "Run!" she commanded, adrenaline surging in her veins as she broke free, dragging Jake away from the magnetic horror unfolding behind them. Back into the depths of the woods, she prayed they could leave it behind. The trees loomed like sentinels, branches reaching out as if they too wanted to restrain them. The shadows clung to her, the laughter wrapping around her like vines, stifling. Every rustle in the thick underbrush felt alive, alive with menace. Suddenly, there was a whisper just behind them, "You cannot escape." The voice sounded like a cacophony of anguished cries, echoing hollow promises. "Mommy, it's here!" Jake shouted, sheer terror flooding his eyes as he turned to glance behind. Sarah dared a look too. The figure, now an amalgamation of twisted faces, souls lost to despair, began to chase them with purposeful malice. They sprinted deeper into the forest, limbs burning as fear urged them on. The sounds of the night turned frantic, leaves rustled, branches cracked. Something was gaining on them. "Keep going, we can't stop," she yelled, her breath ragged. Just ahead, a faint glimmer broke through the trees and clearing, perhaps safety. They exploded through the underbrush into the open space, but as they stumbled forward, Sarah froze, dread pooling in the pit of her stomach. The moonlight illuminated the ground, a graveyard of forgotten souls, the earth adorned with headstones that marked not bodies but memories of anguish, desperation, and the weight of choices long unmade. "Don't stop. Stay with me," Sarah pleaded, but Jake's small hand slipped from hers in shock, his eyes darting toward one of the stones inscribed with a name eerily familiar. "Mommy, what's that?" An icy dread settled as she turned to follow his gaze. There, etched in stone, was a name that felt like a knife twisting in her heart, her own. "What have we awakened?" she gasped as shadows rushed in behind them, an encroaching tide. In that haunting moment, she understood the darkness was not just hunting them, it was already entwined in her fate. The darkness was no longer content with merely haunting the house. It had cast its hunger into the world beyond. As the shadows surged, Sarah felt the weight of the night crush her spirit. They weren't just being hunted. They were now part of an ancient cycle, and even escape could be a trap. "Jake, hold on," she clutched at him desperately, but their fight was just beginning. The real terror loomed ever closer, its whispers mingling with Jake's breath, promising that nothing, no one could be saved. What awaited them in this wretched expanse would test the limits of their courage. Would they emerge from the shadows, or would they be lost forever in the darkness of their own making? The cold grip of dread tightened around Sarah as she looked back at the grave markers, their silent witnesses to a history steeped in pain. Shadows danced menacingly, their tendrils stretching toward her as if they swirled with intention. "Mommy!" Jake cried, his voice a piercing wail in the dismal silence, laced with fear that threatened to paralyze her. "Stay close!" she shouted, pulling him back toward her. But she could see the horror creeping into his wide eyes, could feel it creeping into her own. Time slowed as the shadows surged around them. The air was heavy, thick with an unseen presence that felt ancient and deeply hungry. Sarah's heart raced, a drumbeat of panic pounding in her ears. This clearing, this cursed plot of land was not safe. It was a trap, laid by the very darkness they had fled. "Look!" Jake pointed toward one of the headstones, its weathered surface glinting in the pale moonlight. A chilling inscription caught her eye, "Here lies Sarah Mitchell, a mother's regret." "No, no, no!" she gasped, her breath hitching. "This can't be happening." The shadows roared, a cacophony of tortured souls swirling like a storm around them. Visions of long-buried memories pierced her consciousness, drifting from the recesses of her mind. Voices taunted her, echoing her own thoughts of guilt, shame, and loss. "Jack's more than just blood," one voice whispered, the familiar timbre of her own mother echoing in her ears. "He needs to be saved by you. Mommy!" Jake's frantic cries snapped her back to reality. He stared wide-eyed at a figure that slipped out from the woods, cloaked in shadows, its face obscured. "Come to me, little one," it beckoned, a hint of distorted affection in its tone. A sense of familiarity tugged at Sarah, but with it came a fierce dread. "Run!" The word tumbled from her lips before she could think. She seized Jake's hand, and they sprinted into the depths of the forest, the trees closing in like the jaws of some massive beast. Every twisted branch above clawed at them, a chaotic melody of their panic filling the night air. "Why are they coming after me?" Jake cried, panting heavily. I don't know, she replied, her voice trembling. But we can't let them catch us. Each crashing step echoed their urgency as fear coursed through her like electricity. Their flight led them to a narrow path, the ground slick with damp earth. A glimmer of hope pierced the despair, perhaps they could lose the shadows in the labyrinth of the trees. But then a sensation invaded her thoughts, the cold realization they were not alone. The darkness could feel them. Run faster, she urged, adrenaline fueling their escape. The frightening sounds turned into a chorus of laughter, making her skin crawl. It was as if the very essence of the forest joined in to partake in their fears. What are we running from? Jake panted breathlessly, his little legs struggling to keep pace. She dared a glance over her shoulder. The figures loomed closer now, faces twisted in unholy glee, shadows mingling into a monstrous form that seemed to pulse with every step. Her breath left her in a burst as she spotted a faint light ahead, a cottage flickering in the distance. There! We can find shelter, she shouted, hope flaring briefly in her chest. But as they raced toward the light, the ground shuddered beneath them, and the figures surged faster, their wails growing louder, more demanding. The air was electric with malice, the scent of decay thickening around her. Mommy! Jake cried out, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked cheeks. Hold on to me, she yelled, pulling him close as they broke into the clearing around the cottage, yet the door stood ajar, creaking ominously, an invitation layered in foreboding. The light flickered, gnarled shadows clawed at the walls, shifting like they were alive. Sarah, a woman's voice echoed from deep within the cottage, soothing yet ominously distorted. We've been waiting for you. Go back. She screamed, dread consuming her as she felt their presence behind her, moving closer. The shadows whispered and churned, and Jake pulled her hand in panic. Into the light, Mommy, he pleaded, deep sobs shaking his small body, but now she felt the pull, the temptation to step inside, to surrender to whatever awaited them. The choice loomed heavy: safety or sacrifice. As the shadows poured closer, Sarah felt the structure of her reality begin to crack. What awaited them inside the cottage may seal their fate forever, but the shadows would claim them if they stayed outside. Jake, we need to decide, she screamed, torn between terror and the siren call of the dark, but from the woods behind them, the darkness pressed in relentlessly, and every instinct screamed to flee. Trapped in her own nightmare, Sarah faced the ultimate test. Would she embrace the light, or would she let the darkness win again? The cottage door swung wider, and a rush of cold air pulled them closer. Which path would they take? The moment hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah's mind raced. She hesitated, heart stuttering in her chest. The pressure from the shadows behind them was palpable, a cold breath on the back of her neck. They were almost here. Mommy, please. Jake tugged at her hand, his wide-eyed terror reflected in her own. The flickering light was unnervingly inviting, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced around them, urging her to step inside. Just a little closer. The voice called again, its sing-song melody twisting through the air like a serpent. It promised safety, warmth, comfort, everything Sarah yearned for amidst the enveloping darkness. But with every instinct screaming at her, she knew this was no sanctuary. The air was thick with deceit, and beneath that false light lay the echo of forgotten history and trapped souls. The fear of the unknown wove itself around her, tightening her grip on Jake's hand as they edged backward. Then, another chilling whisper cut through the clamor of the night. What are you afraid of, Sarah? You are the key. You must return. The shadows converged, groaning and whispered accusations swirling around them. Memories flashed before her mind's eye, faces she had buried, desires she had rejected. Guilt boiled in her stomach as she gazed at Jake, innocence woven into his very being, vulnerable against the ravenous dark. Stay behind me, she urged Jake, pushing him slightly behind her, but the shadows lunged. In that moment, she could feel the darkness clawing at her thoughts, urging her toward surrender. It felt familiarity, a connection she could not deny. Mommy, don't let it take me. Jake cried, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist. She could feel his small body trembling, his breaths quick and shallow, matching the frantic beating of her own heart. The door swung wider, a laugh echoing from within, sharp and mocking. "Come home, Sarah. Everything will be all right." Everything in her wanted to trust it. Everything whispered that she should step forward, to trust that whatever dwelled inside would offer answers, solutions. But as she stood, wavering, the shadows surged, their forms shifting into grotesque caricatures of the lives lost, lives likely sacrificed to entrap her in this curse. "Go," she urged one last time, voice breaking as she positioned herself between the boy and the impending doom. "Just run." But the ground shuddered, the darkness moving with a life of its own, closing in. Sarah felt it wrap around her ankles like chains, dragging her further toward that wretched door. "Jake!" she screamed, fighting back as panic set in. And then, in a blur, the shadows lunged. The darkness whisked through the air, an oily tendril snaking toward them, bits of laughter mingling with the ominous murmur of voices, all demanding, pleading, threatening. A horrific fear clenched inside Sarah's chest, clawing at her resolve. "No!" she cried out, pulling Jake close as the shadows lashed out. In an instant, the world exploded in a burst of sound, a cacophony of wails and fear echoing through the night. The shadowy figure from earlier had returned, its laughter sharper than before, and now it lunged forward, reaching for Jake. "Mommy!" Jake screamed, pulling away as a hole opened in the ground beneath them, inviting them to plunge into the depths of despair. In that instant, Sarah felt the dread solidify. With a desperate cry, she shoved Jake in the direction of the cottage as the ground trembled violently. The shadowed figure collided with Sarah, and in that moment of darkness, she felt the last bit of light slip from her grasp. The air turned cold, and a haunting voice whispered in her ear, "You are mine now." Sarah felt time fracture as darkness enveloped her, and the last thing she grasped was Jake's terrified face, fading into the shadows. But within the dark, a flicker ignited. Whispers threaded through her consciousness, a forgotten strength rising. "Mommy! Don't leave me!" The cottage rumbled again, but this time, Sarah felt a pulse, a heartbeat beneath her. The shadows pressed in, but somewhere nestled. In the terror was a glimmer of resolve. Perhaps she was stronger than them, but what if they were living inside her, sharing her mind, whispering promises? What if the fight was within her? Outside, the night cloaked every corner in never-ending dread. The very essence of that forest felt alive, yet Sarah realized perhaps it feared her. "Jake!" Sarah whispered softly, fighting against the rising darkness. The question loomed, heavy and unforgiving. What would she sacrifice to keep him safe? The chill deepened as shadows stirred around her in response. Would she become a mother driven mad by the darkness, or would she wield it as her weapon? The door slammed shut behind them, sealing both light and dark within, as the pulse grew stronger. "Now we truly find out who you are, Sarah." The voice slipped around her, coiling like smoke, and into the labyrinth of choices that waited. She felt ready for the coming storm. But how much darkness could one heart endure before being consumed? The shadows thrummed with anticipation, vibrating around Sarah as she stepped deeper into the cottage's dark embrace. Her heart raced, each pulse a reminder of the urgency to rescue Jake, but she was ensnared. The shadows whispered her name, haunting, seductive. They promised a reunion with everything she had lost, everything she had abandoned in her frantic escape from a life drowned in darkness. "Stop it!" she shouted into the suffocating air, summoning every ounce of strength. Her voice echoed, reverberating off the walls, barely mastering the rising panic. "Leave us alone." The shadows writhed in a blasphemous dance, mocking her defiance. Tendrils of darkness slithered toward her, curling around her wrists, whispering secrets of the past. Memories unspooled, images of nightmares she couldn't bear to face. Faces filled with disappointment, whispers of cowardice, all clawing at her sanity like desperate hands reaching from the abyss. "You can't fight us," the voice crooned, slithering under her skin. "You are one of us. You're the key." Come home, dear Sarah. Home. The very notion turned her stomach. The comforting warmth of that word twisted into something grotesque, something heaving with anguish and betrayal. But beneath that weight, a flicker remained. Jake was her anchor, tethered to a light she couldn't afford to lose. No matter how tempting the shadows became, she would not falter. Mommy. Help me, please. His voice sliced through her fog, a beacon of innocence choking on fear. Hold on, Jake. She cried, forcing her feet to move, yanking against the shackling darkness. With each step, the shadows yelped and shrieked, a cacophony of regrets swirling around her, dragging at her resolve. She glimpsed a small window, moonlight spilling through like a promise. I'm coming for you. She urged, hoping that passion would overpower the encroaching darkness, that love would illuminate this cursed place. Step inside, the truth awaits, the voice waxed, dulcet and enticing. No. She gritted her teeth, shaking her head as tears pricked at her eyes from the suffocating dread. The shadows lunged, a chaotic mass of terror, reaching for her throat, her mind, her very essence. She spun on her heel, desperate to find Jake, her breath hitching. Mommy. Jake's voice cracked with fear, echoing from the far corner of the room. She turned, and there he was trapped, surrounded by a swirling tempest of shadow, his face pale and ghostly against the hazy light. With nothing left to lose, Sarah barreled forward, launching herself toward him. The shadows shrieked in fury as her arms reached out. Just as her fingers grazed his small, trembling shoulders, the dark mass whipped around them, pulling Jake away with a sorrowful wail. No! Sarah cried out, the scream reverberating through the cabin. She grasped his arm, fighting against the oppressive weight trying to pry her from him. Let him go. I won't let you take him. The shadows coiled tighter, a serpent constricted around its prey, but she tightened her grip. Why won't you join us? The voice hissed, warping in tones like shattered glass. You belong here, Sarah. You would feel the joy of surrender. The very thought made her stomach churn. Why would she surrender the only beacon of light in her life? Each roar of the shadows washed over her like ice water, seeping into her bones. But she could still feel that flicker, the heartbeat flickering like a candle, growing brighter with every moment of refusal against the tide of despair. Mommy. Jake whimpered again, and in that instant, Sarah felt a surge of energy electrify her veins, a desperate gambit crystallizing in her mind. Listen, she screamed, drawing on every ounce of her power. You will not scare me. You will not take my son. In one fierce motion, she yanked Jake towards her, a primal scream echoing as the shadows recoiled for the briefest moment. But as light surged, flickering like hope, the shadows snarled in rage. You cannot escape your past. The voice thundered. You're ours. With one last push, Sarah dove toward the window, realizing that the shadows would do anything to keep them sequestered from the light. As they leaped toward the glass, she heard a shattering roar, and just as they burst through, the ground beneath them began to split, the tentacles of darkness trying to drag them back down to the depths of its nightmare. As she fell into the moonlit night, breathless and gasping, she clung to Jake, the world spinning around them. Paralyzed by fear, Sarah understood the battle was far from over. Mommy, what is happening? Jake's voice trembled. We'll find a way, she whispered fiercely, her heart thundering as shadows loomed from behind. They were not free yet, and a bigger darkness was hungry for their return. But what horrors awaited them in the open air? Was the forest beyond another trap, another layer of torment? As Sarah and Jake landed on the forest floor, a distant howling echoed, promising the chase was about to commence. Fear gripped her heart anew, tightening its grip. How far would she go to keep them both alive? The moon hung heavy in the sky as Sarah pulled Jake close, the dense trees around them looming like silent witnesses. The air crackled, thick with the remnants of the malevolent force that had chased them. They had escaped the cottage, but she could still feel the echo of darkness, wrapping around her like tendrils. Mommy, what do we do now? Jake's voice quaked, his small frame shaking against her. "Keep moving," she urged, her heart pounding. Every instinct fueled her as they hurried through the woods. The whispers behind them faded ever so slightly, but the feeling of being hunted deepened. The moments they had barely evaded the shadows felt like seconds before the inevitable. Beneath the night sky, she instinctively sought the space surrounding them, searching for a haven, a flicker of hope among the trees. "We need to find help. Someone must know how to stop this." As they pushed forward, a distant glow broke through the suffocating darkness, a cabin nestled in a clearing. The outline pulled at her heart. It looked familiar, almost like an echo of warmth amidst the chilling dread. "There." Sarah pointed. "We can't stop now." She grabbed Jake's hand, leading him into the clearing. The cabin's door swung open with a gentle creak, welcoming them into its warm yet eerie embrace. The inside was filled with battered furniture and flickering candles that cast shadows dancing along the walls. An old photograph hung crookedly on the wall, capturing a family frozen in time: two parents, a young boy, and a girl holding a small dog. As Sarah gazed at the image, something about it tugged at her memory, igniting a wildfire of emotions. "Wait, what if this is a trap?" she whispered, fear creeping back. But the shadows loomed outside, the howls growing closer. They could not linger in the dark. "Mommy," Jake voiced softly, tugging on her sleeve. "What if we're safe here?" "Maybe," she said, but couldn't shake the doubt. "But we can't let our guard down. We need answers." Together they crept further inside, feeling the eyes of unseen forces watch them. Suddenly, from the corner of the room, a figure appeared. A woman stood there, her features worn yet filled with compassion. "You've been through so much," she said softly, her voice wrapping around them like a warm embrace. "I can help you." The woman's eyes held a depth of understanding, a recognition that cut through the tension. "You awakened something that should have stayed buried. But in facing it, you also hold the key to ending its reign of terror." Sarah inhaled sharply, desperation flooding her tone. "What do we do? It's coming for us." The woman stepped closer, urgency shining in her gaze. "You have to confront it, together. Only united can you break the bond it has on you. The past is powerful, but love is stronger." Panic clawed at Sarah's heart. "What if we fail?" "You won't," the woman insisted, her voice steady. "Remember, each shadow is just a reflection of what you fear. Embrace that fear, confront what binds you, and you can reclaim your lives." "Mommy, I'm scared," Jake said, tugging tighter against her. "Me too, buddy." Sarah knelt to meet his gaze. "But we've come this far. We're not giving up now." As the shadows outside howled in rage, they understood their path forward. Reluctantly, Sarah turned to the woman. "What do we need to do?" "The journal," she said. "It holds the stories of those lost. They need a voice. Share your truth, your pain. Only then will the shadows fade." Sarah nodded, adrenaline thrumming in her veins. "Let us do this." With Jake by her side, they turned toward the window. The dark figures slashing through the trees outside came closer, fueled by anger, relentless in their pursuit. She felt the air charge with tension, a wall pressing against every part of her. "Do you remember the stories, Jake?" she asked, gripping his hand. "The miners, the curse?" Jake's eyes widened. "The gold exactly. Mommy, listen." Sarah closed her eyes, summoning all of the pain, fear, and guilt that had hounded her for years. It came flooding back, her past, memories of comrades, faces lost, families torn apart. She felt the shadows respond, swirling in an angry tempest. As she spoke, the words poured out an eruption of emotion powerful enough to fill the empty space around them. "You will not take my son. You will not own this place." The shadows recoiled as she pressed on, barely able to contain the fury bubbling within her. "I stand against your darkness. You may have haunted my dreams, twisted my memories, but you do not define me. Mommy. Jake grasped her tightly, squeezing her hand, sending a warmth through both of them. We can do it. Together. Together. They carved out their truth, their strength feeding into the words. The swirling darkness outside twisted violently, a chaotic symphony of fury and lost dreams, while Sarah's voice rang clear and strong. The shadows surged forward, but with their united force, the light sparked anew, their bond glowing like a beacon in the dark. The cabin was shaking, a clash of light and darkness. The whispers turned frantic, then fading into a haunting wail as the shadowy form lunged towards them. At that moment, the woman stepped back, her eyes a mix of fear and resolve, and finally, with an impulsive leap, the shadows folded back, retreating to the depths of the earth from whence they came. With a sorceress' scream, Sarah closed her eyes, embracing the fear until a blinding light erupted, pushing the shadows further and further away, into nothingness. The air settled. When Sarah opened her eyes, the darkness had vanished, leaving nothing but the peaceful breath of a moonlit night. Jake looked around, confusion slowly turning to relief. We did it, Mommy. He exclaimed, grinning broadly. Yes, we did. Her voice caught, but warmth spread through her heart, a light of hope washing away the shadows of the past. Holding her son firmly against her, Sarah stepped outside into the quiet, calm night, finally free. They had faced the shadows of history, echoed the stories of lost souls, and shined a light on the darkness that threatened to consume them. Timber Falls felt different now, a town with scars but also a promise of healing. As they walked into the dawn of a new day, Sarah understood that the journey ahead would be filled with new challenges, but she wouldn't face them alone. Love and memories would guide them, casting light over the darkness, leaving the shadows to haunt the past. And when she and Jake reached the edge of the woods, Sarah paused, looking back at the town. Goodbye, she whispered. Finally free, the weight of the world had lifted. Their story was only just beginning. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. Smash the like button now to feed the algorithm. Your support really makes a difference. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this wild ending. And don't wait even one more second, instantly share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion.